Orders of the day. Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport.
Order G6, resuming the debate adjourned on March 27, 2018 on the motion for second reading of Bill 6, an act to enact the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services Act 2018 and the Correctional Services and Reintegration Act 2018 to make related amendments to other acts, to repeal an act, and to revoke a regulation.
Further debate. The member from Chatham-Kent, Essex.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today to address what I believe to be a very serious problem. The Liberal government has a history of producing incomplete, skeletal, poorly thought-out legislation. This bill is no exception to that rule. The Correctional Services Transformation Act 2018 is supposed to be a thorough overhaul of a broken correctional system, but it has the same deficiencies as in most other Liberal legislations, and I will get into why I believe that. The bill will not resolve what has come to be called the crisis in corrections, and now they have a new hashtag out there, hashtag fix it. Now, before I get into the meat of the bill, Mr. Speaker, let me just tell you a little bit about that crisis. Last year, a report by the Independent Advisor on Corrections Reform, the IACR, described shocking abuses and disorder in Ontario's detention centres. Detention centres are overcrowded, and cell block violence is a huge problem. In fact, it's at an all-time high. After violent incidents, inmates are often held in solitary confinement without access to rehab programs, and lockdowns are often the only recourse due to short staffing. Now, this has the potential to invite serious abuses. But even when solitary confinement or segregation isn't used as punishment, it still poses a huge problem. On the Liberals' watch, prisoners like Adam Capay have been held in solitary confinement awaiting trial. Capay was held for 4 years in conditions so degrading that previous inmates of the same cell had died. But the Liberals just didn't seem to care. They ignored repeated coroner's inquests, warning of unsafe conditions. 50 reports went to the minister's office, and they were all ignored. 50 reports. It would be convenient to say that the corrections minister was simply asleep at the switch, but in fact, the minister at the time had made a personal visit to Adam Capay's cell. Sadly, not even that prompted him to act, and the Liberal government continued to ignore the problem. It only became a problem for the Premier and her government when Adam Capay's case finally reached the newspapers. So much for the myth of the social justice government and the social justice Premier. That's how the Premier said she wanted to be remembered. I don't think it's working, Mr. Speaker. Also released last year, a surveillance video from the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre in London shows how bad violence in detention centres can be. In that video, an inmate can be seen beating his cellmate to death. A staffing shortage prevented the kind of intervention that might have stopped that altercation. This is part of a systemic problem. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, assaults on correctional officers and other staff have more than doubled over the past 7 years. That's a very alarming increase, and my contacts within the world of corrections mention it whenever we speak, and that's often. Much of the violence in Ontario's detention centres is derived from smuggled weapons and drugs. Full body scanners would do a lot to keep those things out of detention centres, but not all Ontario jails have scanners. A year ago, the Attorney General promised to install full body scanners in all Ontario prisons. Mr. Speaker, we're still waiting. What's the holdup? Why does it take so long? Why does the government treat corrections file like an afterthought? But, Speaker, it gets worse. Ontario's probation and parole system is a joke. Yes, that's exactly what criminals have called it. Our probation and parole officers are not to blame. In many cases, they are actively discouraged from checking up on criminals by making house visits because of insufficient resources. Many are told that they're not even allowed to work outside of business hours. But guidelines published by the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services explicitly state that the community visits are a valuable method of verifying information and enhancing supervision, and yet they're not happening. Offenders are often left to self-report, but obviously, Mr. Speaker, very few do. A 2014 report of the Ontario Auditor General drew attention to this problem, and a shocking global news documentary on corrections published last year came to the same conclusions. In that documentary, the Corrections Minister was unable to answer any questions seriously, and she was unable to explain why violent criminals were not being properly monitored. Speaker, I found this to be outrageous, but it's clearly a part of a pattern from this low information government. Here's what the stakeholders are saying about it. Under the Liberal regime over the past 15 years, probation and parole policymakers have put enormous emphasis on probation and parole offender risk assessments, such as domestic violence, sex offenses, enhanced offender needs risk assessments, and so forth. But strangely, this has basically transformed the role of probation and parole officer from that of a public safety peace officer to that of a psychotherapist or a mental health clinician. Nothing brought this to light better than Carolyn Jarvis's Global News National Investigative Report entitled Probation and Parole, Who's Watching? Now, the current minister, as I said, was interviewed in that documentary. For the minister, unfortunately, it didn't go well for her. And I wonder whether anyone in that government saw it. Anyway, Liberal probation and parole policies prohibit officers from conducting compliance checks and monitoring their offenders' adherence to probation and conditional sentence orders in the community. My friend Scott McIntyre is Vice President of OPSU and the Probation and Parole MERC representative. As he puts it, the Liberals have removed the community from community corrections. Scott has a way with words, and so I'm going to quote him again. And here's what he had to say. Excessive workloads and a lack of appropriate safety and security measures for probation and parole officers has handcuffed us to our desks. Handcuffed to our desks? That, Mr. Speaker, is a very shocking image. But I'm afraid it's what I would expect from a tired, out-of-touch, low-information government that does not respect its stakeholders. The ministry says that the police are responsible for performing P&P compliance checks. However, Global's investigative report clearly confirmed that the Ontario Association of Police do not agree that it is their responsibility to do that. Honestly, who is monitoring and who is performing compliance checks on the near 45,000 criminals who reside in our communities? Who's watching? When we realize that 60% of those criminals are medium to very high risk, the crisis in corrections seems even more severe. This, Mr. Speaker, is an outrage. As the investigative report showed, offenders describe probation and parole supervision as a joke. And it's getting worse. Since Howard Sapers released his report in the fall of 2017, we've seen an astonishing increase of more than 40% of criminals being released on parole. If this statistic were more widely known, people would be furious. It would appear that the Ontario Liberals have foolishly released criminals from custody into a probation and parole system that has a critical workload crisis and which does not perform offender monitoring in the form of compliance checks. I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, over 45,000 people are on probation or parole, and 60% of that number are medium to high risk offenders. The Liberals have utterly failed at ensuring the safety of Ontarians by way of having sufficient staffing numbers of PPOs and a system that actively monitors offenders in our communities. One of the most basic duties of a government is to maintain an orderly and safe society. But if criminals on parole or probation are not being properly supervised, then the government has failed to perform a key part of that duty. Frontline stakeholders such as correction officers represented by the Ontario Public Service Employees Union are justifiably outraged. Mr. Speaker, I want to just take a moment. Received an email just yesterday. I mentioned Scott McIntyre, and Scott is the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Service Probation and Parole MERC rep. He was extremely disappointed in the budget for Community Safety and Correctional Services. Basically, there was nothing in there. They were saying that, that what they really need are 300 more probation and parole officers to effectively do the job and to monitor those probation and parole offenders who are out in our communities, medium to high risk, who are out in our communities. You want them to self-report? Well, that's asking a child to go into a candy store and say, "Don't you dare touch the candy, I'll be back in a minute." A child's going to offend. They're going to disregard what you have to say. So again, extremely discouraged by a lack of respect that this government has for the community safety and correctional services aspect of probation and parole, as well as the correction officers. I get worked up over that, Mr. Speaker. Not long ago, that union began a letter-writing campaign to bring awareness to corrections, the crisis in corrections. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what was said. And I'm quoting now from an OPSU media release. And I quote, "For decades, the Ontario government has neglected our correctional facilities. As a result, there is a constant threat to the safety of inmates and staff. Further, our probation officers have such high workloads that they are unable to safely and effectively monitor offenders released into our communities." Let me say that again. They are unable to safely and effectively monitor offenders released into our communities. There are just two issues that have created a crisis in corrections. The crisis poses a clear danger to staff safety, inmate safety, and public safety, and it must be addressed without further delay. Emails went to MPPs with copies to the Premier, the Correctional Services Minister, the Attorney General, and the Crisis in Corrections team. It was a great example of civic engagement, but the response was appalling. Let me quote Chris Jackal, who is chairman of the bargaining committee team for the Correctional Bargaining Unit. I am referencing another OPSU media release here, and I quote, "It's very discouraging when government MPPs try to deny that our correctional system is in a crisis. It shows just completely out of touch the government is with the reality in corrections." It's exactly what he said. Furthermore, OPSU condemned the canned, low-information response from this Liberal government. Mr. Jackal called the prepared messages, and I quote, highly politicized. He said it was the kind of non-response politicians use at question period to avoid answering difficult questions when you use them to respond to the genuine concerns of workers on the ground. They're just a slap in the face. Just a slap in the face, Mr. Speaker. Those are strong words indeed. But I'm afraid I have to agree. By way of example, Jackal came down hard on the government's assertion that Ontario's streets are safer than ever. Jackal described the claim as preposterous. He pointed out that the Global News investigation revealed there are no compliance checks for as many as 50,000 offenders in the community, including sex offenders. No compliance checks, which includes sex offenders? Furthermore, Ontario has the country's highest rate of recidivism. And that brings us back to the origin of this bill that we're now debating. The Liberal government, which is about to shuffle off this mortal coil, wants us to believe that they've had a deathbed conversion, or maybe a pre-election conversion would be more accurate. I suppose that the Liberals just didn't want to go down in history as dumb on crime. They wanted one last shot at addressing the stakeholders' anger and maybe at correcting their own mistakes. So, less than 72 days before the next election, they finally introduce a bill which purports to resolve the crisis that I just described. Well, I really do want to emphasize that word purports, because this bill is really the triumph of hope over experience. I note that OPSU was pleased about one major aspect of the bill, which, however, is the government seems to finally have decided that there really is a crisis in corrections. Otherwise, the bill leaves much to be desired. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to criticizing the bill, the problem is not where to begin, but where to stop. So let's start. Let me draw your attention to one of the strangest aspects of this bill. Would you believe me if I told you that the government is giving itself 10 years to bring this bill into effect? 10 years. Unbelievable. And you can see it for yourself in Section 147, Section 2 of the bill. What kind of government needs 10 years to pass and implement a law? Did the Chrétien-Martin government pass legislation only to have it finally implemented under Stephen Harper a decade ago, or a decade later? Did the McGuinty government spend its early years passing and implementing legislation for the Mike Harris and Ernie Eves government? Is Prime Minister Gerald Butts, Justin Trudeau, busy passing Stephen Harper's bills? No, that would be laughable. So there are two things a reasonable person might conclude about this strange timeline. One is that the Liberals think that they deserve to be in power forever. They think they will be in power forever, or at least 10 years from now. So the ridiculous 10-year timetable will suit that fantasy just fine. Another more likely possibility is that the Liberals don't know how to solve the crisis in corrections, and I don't expect to be able to do it. So ever. Well, Mr. Speaker, my instincts tell me that the second one is true, not the first. And this absurdly long timeline is a good enough reason on its own to reject the bill altogether. But there are, of course, other good reasons. Let me remind ourselves again of the context of the crisis in corrections. The bill comes in response to a series of damning reports and investigations by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the Ontario Ombudsman, the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre Task Force, and the Independent Advisor on Corrections. Sadly, some of their findings highlight problems that were already old, but haven't been addressed yet. My friend Monty Visselmeyer, who is chairman of the Ministry Employee Relations Committee for Correctional Services at OPSU, had this to say in a press release last year, and I quote, "The ministry has failed to give frontline staff the tools they need to properly manage segregation. I refer to those tools as the 3 T's: training, technology, and time." He goes on to say, of course, none of these things come without a price tag. They require substantial funding and staffing investments by ministry. If they're serious about easing the crisis around segregation, they have to address the larger crisis in corrections. OPSU President Warren Smokey Thomas had strong comments also. In response to the Ombudsman report on segregation, he had the following to say, and again I quote, "None of this is new. It's all about a properly funded correction system and properly funded public services. There's just no getting around it. And nothing is going to change until this government finally takes responsibility for easing the crisis that its austerity agenda has created." Speaker, we're talking about a serious breakdown in an important part of our justice system and a failure to enforce law and order. We're talking about problems which extend to every part of the corrections system. Minor tinkering is not going to help. I call that putting a Band-Aid on an open wound. So let me repeat so that I'm not misunderstood. Detention centers are crowded. Cell block violence is at a huge problem. After violent incidents, inmates are often held in solitary confinement without access to rehabilitation programs. A newly released surveillance video from the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre in London shows us how bad the violence can be. In that video, and I've mentioned this before, an inmate can be seen beating his cellmate to death. A staffing shortage prevented that kind of intervention that might have stopped the altercation. Assaults on correctional officers and other staff have more than doubled over the past 7 years. Too many inmates are now held in solitary confinement, often in appalling conditions, and sometimes for years. The Ontario Rights Commission has taken the government to court over such terrible abuses. Why am I reminding you of all this, Mr. Speaker? Well, let me tell you. People often say that Canada's founding motto was peace, order, and good government. That's from the British North America Act. And apart from that, the maintenance of order is an important conservative principle. Edmund Burke, the father of English-speaking conservatism, put it best, and I quote, "The only liberty that is valuable is a liberty connected with order, that not only exists along with order and virtue, but which cannot exist at all without them. It inheres in good policy and steady government as in its substance and vital principle." But what is order? Let me answer that question by quoting American historian and political theorist Russell Kirk. And I quote, "Order is the principle and process by which the peace and harmony of society are maintained. It is the arrangement of rights and duties in a state to ensure that people will have just leaders, loyal citizens, and public tranquility. It implies the obedience of a nation to the laws of God and the obedience of individuals to just authority. Without order, justice can rarely be enforced, and freedom cannot be maintained." And again, that was a quote taken from American historian and political theorist Russell Kirk. In our political tradition, we do not separate order from justice and freedom. And again, Kirk explains, and I quote, Justice is the principle and the process by which each man is accorded the things that are his own, the things that belong to his nature. This concept, the old Greeks and Romans expressed in the phrase, to each his own, is the principle and the process that protects a man's life, his property, his proven rights, his station in life, his dignity. It's also the principle and process that metes out punishment to the evildoer, which enforces penalties against violence and fraud. The allegorical figure of justice always holds a sword. Justice is the cornerstone of the world, divine justice and human justice. It is the first necessity of any decent society. And freedom is the principle and the process by which a man is made master of his own life. It employs the right of all members of adult society to make their own choices in most matters. A slave is a person whose actions, in all important respects, are directed by others. A free man is a person who has the right and the responsibility of deciding how he is to live with himself and his neighbors. So I say again that the most basic duty of government is to maintain orderly society. That is the foundation of justice and freedom. But if detention centers are inhumane and dangerous criminals on parole and probation are not being properly supervised, a government has failed to maintain an orderly society. The current Liberal government and its supporters should ask themselves, how did they allow this to happen? They should start by asking themselves why they allowed appalling violence in detention centers to get out of control. How did they allow detention centers to become so badly crowded? Why are they over capacity? Why has it not occurred to the minister that crowded jails could, at least in theory, be combated by reducing excessive wait times for corrections investigations and providing the resources necessary for staff in detention centers? Why is it not obvious that proper supervision and enforcement of probation and parole officers is absolutely essential? Why does no one seem to realize that it's high time the government did something but enforcing its own guidelines? This pre-election conversion just won't cut it. It's fooling no one. Those recent reports that I mentioned paint a very grim picture indeed. Minor tinkering isn't going to fix the crisis in correction. The government must take serious and thorough action immediately, not 10 years from now. If you recall, Mr. Speaker, I mentioned their plan is a 10-year plan. Well, I want to revert back to when the Attorney General, the former Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, stated that all detention centers, jails, would have full body scanners. Many do, but we're still waiting for the rest. And as a result of that, violence, weapons, drugs still occur within our jails and our detention centers. The bill before us is totally inadequate. But, Mr. Speaker, what does the bill propose? Well, let's get right into that now. First, the bill attempts to redefine segregation means. What segregation means, rather. So let me read from the bill, and I quote, this is from Bill 6. Inmates held in conditions that constitute segregation or restrictive confinement retain all rights and privileges of inmates in general population housing except those that can only be enjoyed in association with other inmates. Mr. Speaker, certain inmates cannot be held in conditions that constitute segregation, including inmates who are pregnant, chronically self-harming, or suicidal, or who have significant mental illnesses or developmental disabilities. Inmates shall not be held in conditions that constitute segregation for more than 15 days or for more than 60 aggregate days in a 365-day period. This is from the bill. The aggregate day maximum can be exceeded if authorized by a decision of the independent review panel. These limits do not apply in prescribed correctional institutions. Superintendents may hold inmates in non-disciplinary segregation in certain exceptional cases if all options to manage the inmate have been exhausted. The superintendent shall maintain a record of the options that were exhausted before the inmate was held in those conditions. As well, the superintendent shall also conduct a preliminary review of the case within 24 hours after they are placed in those conditions. Inmates being held in conditions that constitute segregation for non-disciplinary reasons must be offered the opportunity at regular intervals to associate with others. Provisions for regular visits by healthcare professionals to inmates held in conditions that constitute segregation are provided. In particular, a member of the mental health care service team must review the inmate's mental health at least once every 5 days. A referral must be made to the independent regional chair to have a hearing before an independent review panel when an inmate has been held in conditions that constitute segregation for non-disciplinary reasons for either 5 or 10 consecutive days. A referral must also be made for any inmate held in conditions that constitute segregation when they reach 30 and 55 aggregate days of being held in those conditions. Upon receiving a referral, the chair shall convene an independent review panel to review the inmate's case and determine whether it is reasonable to continue holding the inmate in conditions that constitute segregation. The panel can also authorize a superintendent to continue to hold an inmate past the limit of 60 aggregate days in a 365-day period. So, Mr. Speaker, let's just pause for a moment and let's break that down. Simply break it down. The bill aims to redefine segregation as any type of custody where an inmate is highly restricted in movement and association with others for 22 hours or more. Certain inmates, such as those who are pregnant, mentally or physically ill, or even suicidal, will be exempt from segregation. Segregation will be restricted to no more than 15 consecutive days and no more than 60 aggregate days in a year. I've mentioned that before. Subject to review by whom? The independent review panel, which will be created by this bill and future regulations. But here's the essence of the problem, Mr. Speaker. My contacts within the world of corrections tell me this is a bad move. I looked at them and I said, really? Tell me why. The threat of segregation, pardon me, the threat of segregation as a deterrent or its use as a punishment will be significantly reduced if the penalty for misbehaving will be predictably restricted to no more than 15 consecutive days and no more than 60 aggregate days in a year in segregation. Obviously, the legislation foresees the possibility of extending or prolonging segregation, but the precise details of this are vague because they are left up to future regulations. My friend Monty Visselmeyer is chairman of Correctional Division at OPSU. Monty acknowledged that the bill addresses a number of correction-related issues, including segregation. But after examining the bill, he said that correctional officers were still awaiting alternatives to segregation. This is what he had to say in a recent news release. If the government wants to address segregation, they need to provide alternatives for the various reasons it currently used. One inmate to one cell would solve the problem. In light of Canadian case law, we need answers. But what the bill describes sounds not only inadequate, but also just pretty bad. And I'm referring to the plan to create the independent review panel. Leaving aside the fact that most of what it will do and how it will be staffed and so forth are put up to some future undemocratic regulatory process, this panel sounds like little more than a whole lot of paper pushing and bureaucracy. The independent review panel will review and decide cases of segregation after 5 and 10 consecutive days and after 30 and 55 days aggregate of segregation over the course of a year. Well, here's a description of it from the preamble of Bill 6. And I quote, "A referral must be made to the independent regional chair to have a hearing before an independent review panel when an inmate has been held in conditions that constitute segregation for non-disciplinary reasons for either 5 or 10 consecutive days. A referral must also be made for any inmate held in conditions that constitute segregation when they reach 30 and 55 aggregate days of being held in those conditions. Upon receiving a referral, the chair shall convene an independent review panel to review the inmate's case and determine whether it is reasonable to continue holding the inmate in conditions that constitute segregation. The panel can also authorize a superintendent to continue to hold an inmate past the limit of 60 aggregate days in the 365-day period." Now, I hope my colleagues across the aisle are paying attention here. I don't even know if they've read their own legislation, but I digress. The bill foresees an excessively bureaucratic process of report writing, consultation, and deliberation on inmates in segregation. The independent review panel would review and make decisions on cases of segregation in intervals of 5, 10, 30, and 55 days of segregation over the course of a year, potentially 16 or more reports over the course of a year. For simply one inmate. It should be immediately obvious why this is ridiculous. The independent review panel is obviously meant to address the abuse connected with the segregation of Adam Capay, who spent 1,560 days in solitary confinement, awaiting trial in conditions so appalling that previous inmates had died there. What's the problem, you ask? Well, senior bureaucrats at the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services have been alerted more than 50 times in Capay's segregation. And the minister at the time had even visited Capay's cell and seen for himself the horrendous conditions there. I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. I cannot overestimate the importance of what has happened to Adam Capay. Now, to the government's credit, they're attempting to rectify that. So 50 reports and a personal visit from the minister didn't motivate the government to do something about Adam Capay and the horrendous conditions in which he had been confined. How will more bureaucracy and even more reports help? I digress, but they talk about being a green government, and yet they're killing trees with all the paperwork. In this connection, I'm reminded of that quotation from John Maynard Keynes. Government machinery has been described as a marvelous labor-saving device which enables 10 men to do the work of one. There's also that famous Mr. Ronald Reagan. one of the greatest presidents of the United States of America. I might get some pushback from the other side, but I understand that. Here's what President Ronald Reagan said: "No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. Government programs, once launched, never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on earth." He certainly did have a way with words, Mr. Speaker. Now, obviously, the Liberals are inclined to think that more bureaucracy is a solution to every problem. But, Mr. Speaker, I beg to differ on that. At best, all the independent review panel will do is chew up and drain valuable resources. At worst, it may create a culture of excessive report writing in order to justify the existence of the independent review panel itself. But the fundamental problem is not the number of frequency of reports. It's the fact that in the case of adequate pay, all the reports were ignored. So they develop an independent review panel. They're going to create all these reports for one individual. Then what are they going to do with it? Is it going to be the same as Adam Capay? Over 50 reports and they were ignored? More paper pushing, Mr. Speaker, isn't going to solve that problem. Only a better, more attentive, more competent minister and staff will do that. The present minister's attempts to dodge the questions about dysfunctional parole system and the rest of the crisis in corrections is an appalling abnegation of her ministerial responsibility. Ministerial responsibility means that a minister is ultimately responsible for all actions of a ministry, whether he or she knows about it or not. It's called staying on top of the files and knowing what's going on, trusting and communicating with those in whom you are in authority over, and ensuring that what is supposed to get done gets done in a timely fashion. Ministerial responsibility is not a statute or a codified part of our Constitution. It's part of our unwritten traditions. But this does not make it any less important. If waste, corruption, or any other misbehavior is found to have occurred within a ministry, the minister is ultimately responsible, even without knowledge of misdeeds or oversights by subordinates. The minister approved the hiring and continued employment of those people within the ministry. Now, Mr. Speaker, if improper conduct occurred in a ministry, well, an honorable minister would feel compelled to resign. Obviously, that hasn't happened in this case, which is another indication that this government just doesn't take its work particularly seriously. Mr. Speaker, I've had this particular Community Safety and Correctional Services critic portfolio, and now my primary emphasis on detention centers. I've had that responsibility for the last 3.5+ years. I take my role very seriously. I've communicated, I've held blue ribbon panels, I've talked to COs, I've talked to probation and parole officers, I've talked to bailiffs, I've talked to nurses, I've talked to other staff involved in corrections. And they all say the same thing as well. It is the responsibility of the minister to ensure that what is said is followed up on, adhered to, and delivered in a timely manner. And if there's any misdirection, then perhaps that minister should step aside. In fact, the minister's attitude and behavior has seriously eroded ministerial responsibility and decreased the public's trust in government. And Mr. Speaker, really, I'm sorry to say that this half-baked piece of non-legislation isn't going to get the Liberal government out of the mess that they created and worsened. Thinking on that, again, it's not going to get the Liberals out of the mess that they created and even made worse. Problems with the rest of the bill are basically similar to what I've just described. And let me repeat, forcing bureaucrats to write more and more reports isn't going to do anything as long as ministers and their staff to continue to ignore them. More reports and ignoring them isn't going to make the problems go away. I've always been a firm believer in this. We come up with good ideas, but they're only good ideas if they're not acted upon. So we need to ensure that we take ideas, good ideas, and move them into action, and move them into action immediately. But hang on to your pens, because there's a whole lot more report writing coming. Lockdowns are a typical way of dealing with out-of-control cell block violence, especially in overcrowded detention centers. But this government seems determined to put a stop to that practice and to introduce new and more onerous bureaucracy. According to the bill, if lockdowns last for 5 consecutive days, the superintendent must write a report, send it to the deputy minister and the inspector general. Superintendents must make and submit a new report for every subsequent day of the lockdown. And just to be clear, Mr. Speaker, lockdowns occur because staff are outnumbered and are unable to control cell block violence in overcrowded conditions. That is the root of the problem. And I'll stand here and I will defend the correctional officers and the inmates' safety. But this bill doesn't talk about anything with regards to the safety of correctional officers. It's all about the inmates. And I agree with that aspect of it. But where is the safety for correctional officers as well? They go into work every single day and they put their life on the line. And my motto, their motto is, everyone goes home safe. But to have the things that happen to them, when you talk about the abuse that occurs to those correctional officers, you talk about minor stabbings, being spat at, being assaulted, hit, having urine and feces thrown in their face. That is an assault on human dignity. That has to stop. And what happens to the inmates when that happens? A minor slap on the wrist. Nothing seems to happen to the inmates. And yet, based on perhaps the health of an inmate, and I'm not talking mental health here, but then all of a sudden, our COs who have been assaulted in those ways, next thing you know, they have to go through specific testing to ensure that they haven't contacted anything. I digress, but with reason. An Inspector General will be established by an order in council. That person will have a broad mandate to review, report, and direct and all treatment of inmates and conditions in prisons. Again, the big problem here is that legislation leaves all further details about the position to be defined in regulations. I get a little nervous about that. We debate a bill. It's a low information bill. All these wonderful phrases, all these wonderful ideas. But how specifically they're going to do that and or when they're going to do it, well, we'll leave that up to regulations. At which point then many of us don't even see the regulations. We're going to have to say, we're going to have to have no say, no input, no influence, and no control over regulatory process. That's what's going to happen. But get this. The Inspector General is going to have a lot of work to do taking care of criminals and making sure they're comfortable. Why, you ask? The bill will require every inmate to have access to every kind of health care service. Inmates in segregation must receive daily visit from at least one member of a health care service team. This is better health care coverage and treatment than most Ontario families will ever get. Doesn't seem fair, does it? And a lot of people would justifiably be upset if they knew about it. Mr. Speaker, it gets worse. It's as though this government thinks that every problem can be solved by more bureaucracy and report writing. I've talked about that already several times. But let me just say that if bureaucracy immunized us from problems, nothing would ever have gone wrong in Ontario. But back to the bill. The bill provides for disciplinary hearings officers to be created by order in council. Their job will be to conduct hearings and to sanction serious misconduct by inmates. All further details are left to future regulations. And here's the relevant passage. And I quote, "An allegation of serious misconduct shall be referred to a disciplinary hearings officer. The officer conducts a hearing and may impose more significant disciplinary measures if he or she determines that the inmate has committed serious misconduct, including imposing conditions that constitute segregation for no more than 15 days. The inmate may seek to have a decision of the officer reviewed by another disciplinary hearings officer." Silliest thing with this is that serious misconduct is nowhere defined in the bill. Once again, future regulations will determine what that means. Wow. Serious misconduct is nowhere defined in the bill, but it's going to be left up to future regulations. I can think of two problems with that right away. First, as I kept saying, the regulatory process is entirely undemocratic, and this arbitrary government will be able to force whatever they want on the corrections community. Second, it's fundamentally irrational to leave undefined serious misconduct in a bill whose purpose is, at least in part, to make correctional officers safer when dealing with violent inmates and assaults. So this is obviously a major failure of the bill. Frontline workers tell me that they feel that they are in danger. Correctional officers are outnumbered, and they have little recourse when they're attacked. Something needs to be done to keep frontline workers safe. This is why they are so alarmed that the bill seems to severely restrict the use of strip searches, instead stipulating conditions under which strip searches may occur, which is how the bill reads now. The bill should specify when they shall occur. That's in Section 100 of Bill 6. Otherwise, the Act appears to limit the use of strip searches significantly. You know, I want to go back to this just for a moment when we talk about how they feel that they're in danger. You know, I've talked to many correctional officers, and if they feel threatened and an inmate moves towards them and they put their hand up to stop them, just to stop them, what happens? It's all on video, and because they feel that they are lacking management support, they could be remanded for having used excess force. And all they're doing is putting their hand out and stopping an inmate from coming towards them. That's excess force? That constitutes an investigation Some of these investigations, I've talked to correctional officers who have been relieved of their duties, many still being paid, but relieved of their duties for in excess of a year. A year! Well, let me quote from my friend, again, Monty Visselmeyer, OPSU Chairman of Correctional Division. I'm referencing a recent OPSU media release, so we can have an idea of what our stakeholders are saying at this point. We've done everything possible to make the government recognize the crisis in corrections and take immediate steps to alleviate it. The government finally agreed the system was in crisis and required a complete overhaul. However, we remain extremely concerned that the safety of the frontline staff has not been clearly addressed in the bill. He continued. The government has promised that no transformation can succeed without continuous feedback from staff. So we know they'll hear again and again about the vital need for significantly improved safety and scrutiny. Mr. Visselmeyer tells me that dangerously low staffing levels greatly increase the safety risk to frontline workers. The government's claim to have hired 1,100 new correctional officers, but they're fixed-term officers who will fill in when regular officers are away. In reality, only 24 new correctional officer positions have been created. Why increase the danger by restricting officers' ability to strip search inmates and eliminate things like drugs and weapons? Just recently, down at the EMDC, Elgin Middlesex Detention Center, we've heard of more deaths down there, some related to drug overdose. The drugs are getting in. What can we do to stop? Again, I repeat, why increase the danger by restricting officers' ability to strip search inmates and eliminate things like drugs and weapons? Unsurprisingly, stakeholders within the CO and PPO community demand a zero-tolerance policy for violence, along with several serious deterrents from and punishments for assault. In fact, all my contacts tell me they want the minister to do much more to protect the safety of frontline workers. So let me draw to your attention, Mr. Speaker, to an important feature of the bill. There is a section of the bill called Duties of the Minister, Section 3. Frontline workers are adamant that this section include a duty to ensure a safe workplace for staff. Stakeholders report that investigations into misconduct take far too long, sometimes as long as 15 months. Investigations should be limited so that a CO can have his or her name cleared or be disciplined for more expediency. That's in Section 188 and following. But let me focus on something else here, Mr. Speaker. Some major provisions of this bill seem unrealistic or impossible without the appropriate level of staffing. So let's take some example. Exercise and work programs for rehabilitation or reintegration are, in principle, sound. That's Section 78, Subsection 1. No one has an objection that in principle, but institutions do not now have enough staff to make such programs possible everywhere. As I've already said, minor tinkering isn't going to help the problem. Stakeholders would prefer prisoners' mail to be screened and read as a matter of routine, but the Act suggests that this practice would occur only under certain circumstances. That's in Section 104, Subsection 2. The same principle should also apply to telephone conversations and their duration, also Section 104, Subsection 10. In the same vein, the powers of inspection, Section 119, Subsection 1, are unnecessarily broad, and they appear to remove the few protections that workers currently have. If I were feeling especially cynical, Mr. Speaker, I would say that this government has decided that the needs and wants of incarcerated criminals are more important than the rights of correctional officers, and that the order and safety of our detention centers are secondary to making criminals feel comfortable. Obviously, this legislation must be compliant with the written portion of our Constitution and our common law traditions. But it must be said, Mr. Speaker, that correction officers and all prison staff have rights as well. So let me sum up. Ontario crisis in corrections has reached an inflection point. There are staff shortages and overcrowding. Damaged facilities and understaffed nursing stations are now commonplace in Ontario. My colleagues in the opposition and third party have been pointing this out for years, and now, about a month from a writ period, with an election looming, the Liberals want us to believe that they're experiencing a deathbed conversion. Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I don't buy it. And something tells me that the Premier lacks the sincerity of Oscar Wilde or Constantine the Great, who converted on their deathbeds. This piece of legislation and the obscured 10-year timeline for implementation just isn't going to cut it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Questions and comments? The member for Nickel Belt.